We have with us today a very esteemed panel to talk to you about various options to achieve net zero obligations. And our moderator today is Paul Barker, a barrister in independent practice at Doughty Street Chambers in London.
Warm welcome to this London Climate Action Week side event hosted by the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance and our partner organisations. The Net Zero Lawyers Alliance was officially launched on Wednesday as one of the flagship events of London Climate Action Week. It's an industry-led coalition of leading law firms committed to accelerating the transition to net zero emissions by 2050, including by supporting and collaborating with businesses and financial institutions. Our session today is about the critical role that commercial lawyers, like financial institutions, have to play in the race to net zero, and in particular, the importance of young commercial lawyers to these efforts.
It is good to establish, I think, first, why there's so much debate around net zero. Net zero thinking makes geophysical and economic sense. Some emissions will just be hard to abate so that it will be cheaper and more effective to develop technologies to suck an equivalent amount of warming potential out of the air with negative emissions. But I think at the same time, some people fear that net zero pledges have become a gateway to endless fudge. They worry that governments and companies are more comfortable to commit to net zero targets just because it allows them to claim that it's not necessary to reduce emissions now, because in the future they'll deploy technologies to take the carbon out of the air again. That's a risk that lawyers, I think, can help address, and commercial lawyers in particular, because really what we need to do is to make net zero as an approach credible in order to then facilitate the social and economic changes that we need to see to meet those targets. And I also think that the legal sector should make sure to empower its own clients in order to help them to reach net zero and to innovate in the way that is necessary. The net zero transition will really define, I think, much of commercial life over the next few decades. So law firms can either be a part of that or not. And that's a question of values and frankly also of sound business judgment. And my sense is that firms that engage constructively with this challenge will be rewarded because they will have the expertise to enable and service the economy of tomorrow. They will be able to retain and attract the best talent, and they will be able to work with the most exciting clients, because not only the talent, but also the clients set increasingly high standards, and rightfully so, from the law firms that they engage with.
Climate change and dispute resolution, which I think has an increasingly prominent role to play in the transition to net zero. Columbia Law School has a database that's updated each month tracking climate change litigation, and it records literally thousands of climate change disputes that have occurred in the last 10 years. Many of those are sort of public law, tort law, nuisance, human rights, regulatory disputes. But some are also commercial disputes, and I think that we can expect to see a significant increase in commercial disputes and disputes relating to corporate entities in the years to come. And in what context will those arise? Well, put simply, and this picks up on something Thom mentioned, they're going to arise in all of those legal relationships that are established when companies themselves emit greenhouse gases, when they take steps to reduce their greenhouse gases, or when they're helping others to reduce their greenhouse gases. Think about the contracts for construction of low emissions buildings, the development of carbon capture and storage, the decommissioning of oil and gas operations, changes in land use, the generation, purchase, sale of carbon credits, insurance. I mean, the list goes on. But put simply, there are and there will be many opportunities for young lawyers to be involved in and even tailor their careers to disputes involving companies and climate change.
And one of the most kind of interesting practical ways that young lawyers can get involved whilst they are working in commercial law firms is to try to seek to move the needle in a range of commercial contracts that they are involved with. In order to include what we kind of call climate conscious contractual precedent clauses. And one of the organisations that is doing very exciting work in this area is the Chancery Lane project. And one of their kind of key programs is to develop climate conscious contractual precedent clauses and to encourage their active use in standard legal contracts within the organisations that all who are part of this community are working in. So give a bit of a clue as to the impact that they are having and are able to have in the future. The various precedent clauses that have been published have been downloaded over 60,000 times to date, which is an exciting start, but there is so much more that can be done. And to get back to the point on young lawyers, they can really do their bit on making it more market standard to include these types of provisions in the contracts that their law firms use, such as precedent banks, standard form contracts, their client work, as well as both internal and external training.
So I suppose my challenge for young lawyers thinking about careers in this area, it goes along 3 axes. So the first one is obviously do what you're most fascinated in the law anyway, but do it on climate change. You know, if you're a tax lawyer, help us design the carbon tax. If you're a trade or investment lawyer, help us to put together those mutual recognition of clean energy standards that are needed between the different trade and investment agreements, not just the big ones, WTO, et cetera, but also the regional trade agreements, the new USMCA or the new versions of the UK agreement with the EU or the CETA. Help us as well, if you possibly could, to properly craft the trade and investment provisions on enhancing environmental goods and services, right? So use your trade and investment law expertise wisely in a climate-friendly way. And the second axis, which I think is just as important, is to realize that in these negotiations, we are being forced to reconsider and recraft international treaties we already had in place. This isn't just something we do in the Paris Agreement. This is something we do across the board when a problem, the scale and the size of climate change with the impacts that are so serious is coming down the track at us. And that recrafting requires very careful, not just legislative drafting, but international treaty lawyers to do that drafting. And there again, we have a very important role, not just for our law firm colleagues, but for extremely well-trained and ambitious young lawyers who are willing to jump in and actually do the devil's in the details work, which is needed in this area. I'll close with one other slightly speculative point. As you know, the COP26 is coming up, and the Climate Law and Governance Initiative is going to be hosting our usual Climate Law and Governance Day as part of it. And we're also launching, together with Advocate Wendy Miles, QC, and others, the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance. And one of the things that we're really trying to do, and that we need everyone's help on, is to look carefully at the economic law provisions that are being implemented in the Sustainable Development Law treaties. I mean, of course, for COP26, Article 6, the cooperative approaches and the market and non-market instruments that we're actually being asked to put into place. Now, the operational guidelines are not yet finalized on these ones. There's a lot to still discuss, and we haven't got conclusions yet. But as we put the Compliance Committee in practice, as we finally agree on how we're going to implement Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and put in place market-based instruments such as a new version of a sustainable development mechanism, we need commercial lawyers in there getting it right. And that is something that anyone who tells you they've got 30 years of experience in climate law, ask them about it. The treaty itself was only negotiated in '92. Most of us are still struggling. There are no easy answers here. It's a chance to be pioneers in an entirely new field. That would be my final sort of challenge for young lawyers today. If you could think about shifting your practice toward what you can do to help meet first your country's NDC, because after all, that's a commitment you can probably hold them to, and it's going to ratchet up over time, right? And when I had enhance the ambition, like we committed. And then also, of course, moving forward from here, how do you branch out and create entirely new fields? Because that's what we have the chance to do here. You're making a difference through law by joining Climate Lawyers. Well, thank you.
Thank you